We're not going to stand for the reading just yet, but I would like you to be turning to Matthew chapter 22. Matthew chapter 22, verses 36 through 40 is where we're going to be at tonight. And I've got just a little 3-minute video. I want to talk to you about created for God-glorifying relationships. And this little video is just something that opened my eyes to a problem that I have, that I thought that I liked. You'll see what I'm talking about.
It's very lonely. You start to tell yourself that you don't need other people. All I need is me. I don't need anybody else. You have to do that because it bothers you too much. It can hurt too much to be deprived from normal human contact for so long.
Loneliness is very much like pain. It was evolved over time to change our behavior so that we reconnect with others, which is necessary for our survival.
The brain processes loneliness in the same area as physical pain. Being cut off from others can hurt so much that people will go to extremes in order to connect.
Even if they've just been here a couple years, you can just see their mentality just go down. It's pretty rough.
If one is totally isolated, any connection is better than none. People are willing to do negative things so that the others respond to them when they feel lonely. Being ignored is so painful. It's better to be treated badly by someone than to be ignored by someone.
I think segregation is like torture. I ain't afraid to say sometimes I'd fragment and just cry, It hurts. When you move into a cell, you'll look on the floor and you'll see where the cement's worn out from the last person that did the same thing you're going to be doing. Walking back and forth from the bunk to the door, bunk to the door. You'll just notice there's a pattern in the cement where turn, turn, turn. It's crazy. You know that there was just a lot of worry, a lot of pain, ache, anticipation. When you're out there in society, when you walk up to a friend, you shake his hand or you give him a hug or you put your arm around him and you walk around and you talk. When you're in here, you ain't getting none of that. It does break something inside of you. Like you're starved for touch, for that connection.
This hunger is rooted in a biological drive to connect with each other in ways that often go unnoticed in everyday life.
If you've ever watched people when you're in a crowd, individuals are clearly walking by themselves. Even though they're walking next to someone else, they're walking at a different pace, their arms are doing different things, there's no synchrony across those individuals. If you also notice though, sometimes you see people meet and magic happens. All of a sudden these two individuals walk off and they've been synchronized. They're walking in the same pace, their arms are now in synchrony. This all happens automatically. Those individuals didn't have to think about walking off and aligning their steps. We're equipped by nature to have this synchrony and this resonance with other individuals.
These innate connections exist not only in humans, but also in the natural world. And new science suggests humans and animals alike depend on others not just for care and comfort, but for survival itself.
I don't know how many of you heard that, but at the end there, he made a statement. He said, we are equipped by nature to have the ability to join together for common purposes. It's something that is in our DNA. In other words, studies actually show that we have teamwork built into each and every one of us. Now, we're all of a fallen nature, so every one of us falls short of that in some way. But everybody in here has a need to connect with others in some way, some way, form, or fashion. And that goes right along with what the Bible teaches, that we were created for relationships. But before I go much further, let's open up with Matthew chapter 22, verse 36 through 40. Matthew 22, verse 36 through 40. I know we stand a lot, but I do ask that you would stand for the reading of God's Word just to show reverence for the living and powerful Word of God. Matthew 22, beginning in verse 36. This is what it reads. It says, "Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law?" And Jesus said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and the great commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. And on these two commandments hang all the law and all the prophets." You can be seated. It's amazing to me that the very first words that came out of God's mouth after He created man was, "It is not good for man to be alone." You know, there are people like me, and I don't know how many of you are out there like that, but I'm one of those that will tell you I prefer to be alone. And most of the time, a lot of times, I do. But it's only for a time, I promise you that. You put yourself in a situation like what you just saw, to where you have no choice but to be alone, it will mentally kill you inside. We have inside of us a need, a desire to connect with somebody. And those connections have to be made in a positive way. And what we're going to try to look at today is how we were created for God-glorifying relationships. Remember, after He made Adam, He said, "It is not good for man to be alone." Aside from the death penalty, solitary confinement is the most severe form of legal punishment that's allowed anywhere in the States. Aside from the death penalty, it is the most severe form of punishment. You know what that tells us? That tells us that we know that loneliness and putting someone outside of human contact is a very major form of discipline, a form of suffering, a form of punishment. And so, for us to actually do that to ourselves, what are we doing? We're in self-destruct mode, is the fact of the matter. We isolate ourselves and we pull ourselves away from our good connections that at one time when we look at our lives we'll recognize that they were such good connections for us. But then we pull ourselves and we draw ourselves away, and then little by little we don't even realize it, but we're in self-destruct mode. And we're just going into a mentally breakdown, I guess you could say. Don't deceive yourself. It is not good for man to be alone. Don't lie to yourself and actually tell yourself that, yes, I'm one of those people that I prefer to be alone. I don't want to be a close part of a group, or I don't want to be involved in this or in that because I prefer to just be left alone. That's a lie. I promise you it's a lie. And if you ever get put in the place to where you have no choice but to be alone, you'll find out that it's a lie. That you are starved for human contact. That you are starved for nothing more than the connection. I spent probably 8 to 10 hours yesterday watching videos on solitary confinement just to see what it did to the mind. And you know, there was a study that was done, and they actually ended up, they kind of loosened the law on it just a little bit, and I think it was Mississippi, I believe is where it was. And they started pulling these prisoners out of solitary confinement that had been good behavior, and it was time for them to be rejoined to the population, or I guess they were going to take a chance, I guess you could say. And so they brought them out after being in this solitary confinement for, I want to say, 3 months is how long they had been in there. And they put them in a truck together. And the smiles on these guys' faces, they didn't even know each other. But the smiles on these guys' faces, whenever they went up to interview them, I think it was Nightline, they walked up to the back of the truck and they said, "How do you guys feel?" And man, they were smiling. They said, "Man, it just feels good to be with somebody." They didn't know each other. They hadn't even been introduced, but just the guy's exact words, if I remember right, were just to be able to sit down beside of somebody felt so good. that human connection, that human contact is something that each and every one of us need. We were built for relationships, no matter what lies the devil tries to feed you or what lies you try to feed yourself. Think about this. The Bible, from Genesis all the way to Revelations, is primarily a book about relationships. The whole book is about relationships. Think about this. The name of the two sections of the Bible are the Old Testament and the New Testament, or also known as the Old Covenant or the New Covenant. Do you know what the word covenant is? A covenant is a binding agreement. It is a commitment. It is a promise between peoples. It is something that establishes a relationship between peoples. So if the two sections of the Bible are named the Old Covenant and the New Covenant, wouldn't you say that the Bible from beginning to end is a book that is about relationships? The whole book is about relationships. The two greatest commandments, according to Jesus Christ right here, on which all the law and all the prophets, in other words, everything that's been written in the Old Covenant, everything that has been said from the prophets that we get in the Old Testament, all of those things hang on these two commandments right here. And here's what it says. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. This is the first and the great commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang everything that the Bible has to say. So think about this. If we have the right relationship with God, and we have the right relationship with others, our lives will fall right into line with everything that God is trying to teach from Genesis to Revelations. Am I wrong on that? The whole thing is about relationships, and yet that is the one thing that for the most part we struggle with the most. Would you agree with that? I asked you last week to fill in the blank. I said relationships are, and I said blank. And it didn't take no time. Hard was one answer. Vital was another answer. Difficult was another answer. Rewarding was another answer. And so, when you think about relationships, there is such a balance because they are hard and they are difficult. But at the same time, they are rewarding and they are vital for our survival. The whole Bible is about relationships, so it should come as no surprise that God designed the church to grow and for His kingdom to increase through relationships. Look at Ephesians chapter 4, verse 15 and 16. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 15 and 16. Listen to what it says. It says, but speaking the truth in love may grow up in all things into Him who is the head. He's the head, Jesus Christ, from whom the whole body, so we got a head here that's Jesus Christ, and then we got a body that comes from that head, and it is joined and knit together by what every joint supplies. So each part has a share in it, according to the effective working by which every part does its share. It causes growth of the body for the edifying of itself in love. So again, it should come as no surprise that God designed the church to operate on relationships. Now, don't get it twisted. Whenever you read this right here, don't think that He's just talking about when each part does their spiritual gifts. Be very careful, because I want you to understand something. When you look at the entirety of the New Testament, almost 50% of the letters of the New Testament deal specifically with relationships with one another. Almost 50% talks about and teaches us and pleads with us how to be toward one another. And then, do you know how much of that percentage equals up to teaching on spiritual gifts? 4% of the New Testament teaches you about spiritual gifts. Now, I'm not saying they're not important, we can't do anything without the Holy Spirit. We can't do anything unless He gifts us the ability to be able to minister to one another. But at the same time, we have to be able to take that, and then what we use that with is the one another's that over 50% of the New Testament teaches us how to do. Look at Ephesians chapter 4, verse 1 through 8. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 1 through 8. He says, I therefore, the prisoner of the Lord, beseech you. What does that word beseech mean? I beseech you. What does that mean? I plead with you. I beg you. I'm pleading with you. Why would Paul have to plead and beg with us about something? Because relationships are hard. That's why. They're difficult. They're tough. But they are also rewarding. And Paul also knows that they are vital. You cannot go without them. So he says, I beseech you, brethren, to walk worthy of the calling with which you were called, with all lowliness and gentleness, with long suffering, bearing with one another in love, endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. There is one body and one Spirit, just as you were called in one hope of your calling, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God, one Father of all, who is above all and through all, and He's in you all. But, look at verse 7, He doesn't take spiritual gifts out of it. He says, but to each one of us, grace was given according to the measure of Christ's gift. Therefore, He says, and he quotes a prophecy here, when He ascended on high, He led captivity captive, and He gave gifts to men. So here in Ephesians chapter 1 verse 8, you have the fact that we have spiritual gifts among one another. No question about that. And we are meant to minister them to one another. But our focus cannot be just on the spiritual gifts. You're talking 4% of the New Testament focuses on the spiritual gifts. We have to understand that there is a greater ministry that takes place than just some supernatural things that we think should take place. Instead, go back up and look at verse 3 again, and let's take this thing backwards. In verse 3, he tells us that the goal is unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. In other words, oneness, unity. He didn't say everybody agrees and everybody gets along and there are no offenses. If it were the case, He wouldn't have to say endeavoring to keep. Do you know what the word endeavoring means? It means to try very hard. Look it up in Webster. Endeavor. To try very hard. So let's read it like this. Try very hard to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. What does that tell you about relationships? It's difficult. It's tough. You are dealing with imperfect people. But if you keep backing up, you go back to verse 2, you won't try very hard unless you're willing to bear with one another in love. You won't give it any effort. You won't even try unless you're able to bear with one another. That word bear means to endure each other's flaws and failures. Again, look the word up. To endure each other's flaws and failures. You won't endeavor or you won't try very hard to keep unity unless you are willing to endure each other's flaws and failures in love. And you won't be able to endure each other's flaws and failures in love if you're not long-suffering. You know what is the key words in long-suffering? Long and suffering. What does long mean? You're not going to endure each other's flaws and failures if you have a hair trigger. What's a hair trigger, Nick? Ricky Bishop got a kick out of that. A hair trigger. You know what a hair trigger is? You reach in there and you don't even get on your sight good before your finger touches that trigger and it's gone off. And there ain't no getting it back. And you know, that's what happens to so many of us. Instead of long suffering with one another so that we can endure each other's flaws and failures, we just have a hair trigger. And then when something hits us, guess what we do? That's the way we are. And He beseeches us. He pleads with us. Guys, relationships are so vital to the growth of the body, and relationships are so vital to the growth of the kingdom of God. I am begging you to keep the unity, and you're going to have to try very hard to do it, and it's going to require that you bear with one another, or you endure each other's flaws and failures. And in order to do that, it's going to require long suffering. You're going to have to suffer long. And then it's going to require, in the verse 2 again, with all lowliness and gentleness. In other words, you can't endure each other's flaws and failures unless you're willing to not have a hair trigger and you're willing to suffer long. And you're not going to suffer long unless you are humble and gentle. You can't avoid having a hair trigger unless you humble yourself. You know why you snap so quick? Pride. You know why you're offended so quick? Or we're offended so quick? Let me just add myself in here. You know why we do that? Pride. Because we're unwilling to just humble ourselves and actually give each other the chance to keep the unity as much as possible. Only 5% of the New Testament letters deal with spiritual gifts. The majority of the New Testament puts all the emphasis on how we respond to one another in our relationships. Think about that, guys. Think about that. If you're looking at a pie chart, what does 50% take up? What does 4% take up? 50% of our New Testament teachings are pleading with us, guys, please maintain your Christian relationships. You're going to have to try hard. You're going to have to endure each other's flaws and failures. You're going to have to be able to not have a hair trigger and be long-suffering. And that's going to require that you be humble and you be gentle. And it's not an easy thing to do. But guys, I'm pleading with you. 50% of the New Testament is saying that to you as a Christian today. And not only that, Jesus said 100% of it hangs all the law and the prophets attached to it. You think about that. I told you last week that there were 58 or 59, and I should have looked it up to remember which, but there are either 58 or 59 one another commandments that are mentioned multiple times throughout the teachings of the New Testament, such as be long-suffering toward one another, care for one another, comfort one another, serve one another, show hospitality to one another, bear one another's burdens, bear with one another, admonish one another, or gently correct but sternly correct one another, stir up love in one another, stir up good works in one another, teach one another, pray for one another, confess faults to one another. Do you see the relationship that takes place in this? And yet, what do? We are the worst culture in the world to go to our houses and stay to ourselves, right? And then it's even a burden to have to get up and come to church on Sunday morning. It's even a burden sometimes to have to gather together in an opportunity like this to where we really don't even have the opportunity to minister those things to one another because you spend all of your time out there listening to me up here. We have to have other opportunities and other times and other places to where you have the opportunity to develop relationships because they are vital to your survival. Are y'all with me this morning? They are vital to your survival. You know, I don't want to name names here, and I'm not going to name names. But you just think about you and your God-glorifying connection right now. This body of believers. Who is your God-glorifying connection? I can tell you who some of yours were, but they've went on to be with the Lord. Or they're no longer here. And when you look around, I'm just telling you, if you don't have that God-glorifying connection, you won't last long. You're not going to. A connection has to be made. I'll probably bring it into next week's lesson, but there have been so many studies done because the question was asked, do you know that the average Southern Baptist church, I want to say, they said averages between 65 and 75 people? That's the average Southern Baptist church today, 65 to 75 people. And the question was asked, I don't remember if it was Barna Research or Rayner Group. It was one of those big groups that actually asked the question and did the study. Why are our churches on the decline? And you know what one of the number one answers was? The lack of connection between the people in the church. You know, when your church, I can remember back when we were in the little cornfield over here. And let me tell you something. When we were in that little cornfield, we may not have been but about 20, 30 strong sometimes. That's just the truth. But you let one of us get sick. You know where everybody's going to be? Everybody is going to be there. You let one of them have a struggle in their life, and you know what's going to happen? Everybody is going to be there to be a part of that person. And that's easy to do whenever you've got those smaller groups. But I'm just going to be honest with you. Over the last few weeks, me and my wife have just been overwhelmed. And I'm sure Nick and Amanda feel the same way. I sit here this morning, and I don't want to call her out, but a lady come in and sit behind me in Sunday school, and when she sit down, I thought to myself, I have not thought to pray for her in weeks. And I know she needs prayer. And I sit back and I thought to myself, you know, you had this going on, you were thinking about this one, and you were thinking about this one, and you were focused on this, and there's no way that you could have remembered. And then when I thought about her, I thought, you know, there's another lady that had surgery that I prayed for all last week, and this week I haven't even thought about her. And I start feeling about this tall. And the truth of the matter is, God woke me up and He said, you know what? This is the reason why people have to make connections. Because there's no way that Nick and Kevin or anybody else in here can remember 200 people. 20 or 30? We could do that. We could. I can't do it with 200. I can't, brother. I can't do it. I forget so easily. And I know that sounds so bad, but let me ask you a question. How many of y'all can think of somebody right now that you forgot to pray for? That you didn't think about in your family, in your ministry where you belong to and you are a member at? Listen, there are so many different reasons why we have to be able to gather together. I love Ms. Ward. I don't think Ms. Ward's made it back yet. I had to do a funeral Thursday. So I was at the funeral home. And I was talking to Ms. Ward's daughter. She works there. And she told me, I forgot it was her daughter, and she said, Mama was so upset that she wasn't able to go eat Krispy Kremes Monday night. And she's in a little small group that we call the Prayer Dog class out here. Or they meet on Monday nights, and it's just a little group of men and women that get together, and they sew, and they do all kind of other stuff. And they just get together, and they just develop relationships. And she told me Mama was so upset that she didn't get to go with her small group to eat Krispy Kreme. And Ms. Ward is such a quiet person that I bet half of you in here don't even know who I'm talking about. And she's been a member of this church back before probably me, as far as I know. But yet that little small group out there knows her. She was in the hospital a couple weeks ago. Never even crossed my mind, Nick. Just be honest with you. Never even crossed my mind. I had this going on, and we were in the middle of stuff. And just be honest with you, like I said, my wife has been begging me, you know, how about time for us? How about time for us? And I understand that. I do. And I've got to do that. But then at the same time, I'm sitting there thinking, okay, I got to do this, this, and this, and this at home. But then I've got all this going on. But then I come to find out, you know, Ms. Ward, she had plenty of people come by the hospital. You know who they were? Her group. That little group that gets together on Monday nights. That little group that gets together and does their sewing and goes and eats Krispy Kremes together. And that little group that is a part of one another, they call and they check on her. And that's the way that this thing ought to operate and ought to work. Now again, like I said last week, there are no problem-free solutions. There are no perfect people. There are no, they're still going to have to try hard to bear with each other's flaws and failures, to endure them. And they're still going to have to do it with long suffering. And they're still going to have to do it with all these gentleness and humility. All those things still are in there. But they got one thing going right. And you know what's funny about that? That's a group that we didn't even start. It started on its own. It just popped up and it started on its own. We didn't start it. We ain't tried to provide no kind of training. We ain't tried to give them no direction or no goals yet. It's coming. But it's something that's actually operating and working very well to develop God-glorifying relationships in this. Listen, that's the aim of our small group gatherings that we're trying to work on, will be to develop relationships that minister to one another in these ways so that they glorify God as it happens. So here's what I'm going to look at this morning real quickly, what these relationships will look like. What's our goal in these relationships of what we're trying to create? The first goal, we're trying to develop common interest relationships and relationships that only have Christ in common. Listen, many of our relationships happen naturally because of common interests. Whenever I first, or Chris and Calista Pope, they're out of town, and y'all be praying for them, and Joe and Teresa Griggs are out of town, Christy Lane and Tammy Kimber out of town. We got several families that are out of town. You see a lot of blank spaces, so pray for your family that are traveling this week. But when Chris and Calista first came to this church, I didn't know them, didn't know anything about them. And then all of a sudden, one day, I said something about that I was going to go home and get my four-wheeler out and ride my four-wheeler. I enjoy riding four-wheelers. And all of a sudden, Chris Pope heard it and he said, "Hey man, I got four-wheeler trails at my house. I love to ride four-wheelers." And from that moment on, a relationship was developed based on common interest. And that's okay. And that's good. And those can be God-glorifying. But they are not the most God-glorifying relationships. Actually, the most God-glorifying relationships are the ones that are made when you have nothing in common but Jesus Christ and Him alone. There is no other common interest. In other words, it's a relationship that would not happen naturally and on its own. It's a relationship that only takes place as you practice the one another's and minister and show Christ's likeness. And then as you do that, you see that a God-glorifying relationship is established. Look at Romans chapter 15, verse 1 through 7. Romans 15, verse 1 through 7. It says, "We then who are strong ought to bear with the scruples of the weak, and not to please ourselves. Let each of us please his neighbor for his good, leading to edification." So again, the goal is the edification, the growing of faith in Jesus Christ. "Let each of you please his neighbor for his good, leading to edification. For even Christ did not please Himself, but as it is written, the reproaches of those who reproached you fell on me. Whatever things that were written before were written for our learning, that we through patience and comfort of the Scriptures might have hope. Now may the God of patience and comfort grant you to be like-minded toward one another, according to Jesus Christ, that you may with one mind and one mouth glorify the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ." And look at verse 7. "Therefore, receive one another just as Christ," notice those two key words, just as. "Receive one another just as Christ received us to the glory of God." So, we see that the basis of our relationship with each other is Christ's relationship with us, right? It's not based on anything else. It's based on the fact that the way that Christ received us is the way that I receive you. My question to you is this: was your relationship with Christ developed because of what you had in common with Jesus? Did you have anything in common with Jesus when He came to know you? Absolutely nothing. As a matter of fact, you were the weak that He had to bear. The reproaches that belonged to you fell on Him. And He received you. And He said, therefore, if you're going to be like-minded and you're going to operate toward one another the way that you should, it's going to be vital that you receive one another the same way that Jesus received us. The glory of God is shown by how He treats people with mercy and grace. He received us to the glory of God. He received us when we were weak. He received us when we were sinners. He received us when we had nothing in common, and that showed the glory of God. Listen, we have no place in church to decide who we will accept and who we won't accept. None. We receive people the same way that Christ received us. We desire to develop relationships where we are able to share God's glory in Jesus Christ. We want people to look at your relationship. Let me ask you a question. Can you look at any relationship in your life and go, if somebody looks at that relationship and they know the details of it, they're going to only be able to say, only Christ can put that together? I do. I got relationships like that. And I'm hoping that people all around me that know me are able to look at those relationships and go, look at the glory of God. Look at the mercy of God. Look at the grace of God. Look at how He receives the one just the same way that Christ received him. And those kind of relationships are the kind of relationships I want you to focus on. Natural relationships are going to happen. They're just going to happen. They are. I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about whenever you get ready to sign up for a small group, and it'll be volunteer-based. You don't have to. But when you get ready to sign up for one, don't wait and look at the list and go, well, I wonder who I'm going to have the most in common with. What I want you to do is just the opposite. I'd actually like for you to look at the list and go, who do I not have anything at all in common with? And who, if it were not for Jesus Christ, would I never have a relationship whatsoever? So that people can look at that relationship and see the glory of God displayed in mercy and grace. Look for an example for me in Matthew chapter 5, verse 43 through 48. Matthew chapter 5, verse 43 through 48. Jesus said, you have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies, bless those who curse you, do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you, that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. In other words, you want to know one of the distinguishing characteristics of our children? Whether they like it or not, they bear some of our qualities, right? How many of you in here have children? Whether you realize it or not, your children act a lot like you act. Or they act a lot like you acted. Amen, Tina? Whether you like it or not, your children are children that are chips off the old block. And here's what God is saying and Christ is saying to us. If you want to be a reflection of the image of the glory of God, first thing you've got to do is start acting like God. And here's what God does. Keep reading with me. He makes His sun rise on the evil and on the good. And He sends His rain on the just and on the unjust. For if you love those who love you, what reward have you? In other words, if your relationships are only focused, listen to me very clearly, if your relationships are only focused on what you have in common with other people, what do you do any different than anybody else in relationships? Everybody does that. Everybody has those kind of relationships. And they're okay, and they're good, but they are not the most God-glorifying. Y'all following me this morning? Hey, look what He says next. He says, do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet the brethren only, what do you do more than others? Do not even the tax collectors do so? Therefore, you shall be perfect, just as your Father in heaven is perfect. Whenever you go, and I'm not going to go to the Scriptures for lack of time, but whenever you go to the New Testament and see Paul's teaching, he taught about the Jew and Gentile relationship. And he said, guys, Christ has broken down the middle wall. And now two groups who normally had nothing in common, not even food choice. They can't even sit down at the same table and eat the same meal together. If they sit down together, they got to have this for this one and this for this one. And here's what Paul said. Christ has made you one. Come together. Be one. Be one. Be one mind. Be like-minded. Develop these God-glorifying relationships. The second goal of these God-glorifying relationships, they must be faith-nurturing. Listen, it's not just enough to just say, I'm going to be long-suffering and I'm just going to do these things. But instead, your goal has to be, I want to develop these relationships because I want to see Jimmy John's faith grow. I want to develop a relationship with Nick King because I want to see his faith grow and I want my faith to grow. So we bear with one another and we can be long-suffering and comforting, but that's not the end. You don't just go home and lay your head down and go, whew, that was exhausting. I had to be long-suffering. I had to be gentle, kind. I had to humble myself. I am so ready to go to bed and get up and start this next day. If that's the end, you just did nothing but cause yourself anxiety. Come see one of our pharmacists here and they might be able to get you a Xanax or something and maybe that'll get you through the next day. That's not the end. That's not our goal. Our goal is that we can go home and say, God, I'm praying that through my long suffering and through my gentleness and through my kindness, I'm praying with everything in me that Nick's faith was nurtured. That my faith was nurtured. That somewhere along the line that I understood that he had a desire to pray for me and I had a desire to pray for him and I wanted his faith to grow and he wanted my faith to grow and we were in this thing together even though we got nothing else in common. Do you see that? That's the goal that we're trying to reach. The aim of every group should be the growth and the joy of each other's faith. Look with me, if you would, at Philippians chapter 1. I got a couple more scriptures and I am done. Philippians chapter 1, verse 25. Look what it says. Paul says, and being confident of this, I know that I shall remain and continue with you all for your progress and the joy of faith. In other words, our goal should be the growth of each other's faith and the joy of each other's faith. And then in Hebrews chapter 10, verse 24 through 25, he says this. Remember, 50% of the New Testament concentrates on how we respond to one another. He says, let us consider one another in order to stir up love and good works. You know what that word consider means? It means to look intently into. In other words, it's not just to look at them, but to actually look into them and see ways that I can stir up love and good works in Nick. What are some ways that in my relationships can I try to provoke Chad toward a good work or toward love toward someone? And how can I help each other be able to stir up love and good works? Because let me tell you what don't come natural to you. Love and good works. That ain't what comes natural. So we need one another to help prod us just a little bit, to help push us in to the ministry that He's trying to give us. So again, we're trying to develop faith-nurturing relationships. We do want relationships that have common interest, and those are good. Those are enjoyable. But we also want to look at our list when we line up and sign up for certain small groups. We don't want to look at the list and go, well, I'll enjoy that because this and this and this and this person is going to be in this group. Avoid that at all costs. Instead, look at that list and go, if I want to develop the most God-glorifying relationship, let me get in this group because I don't really know none of these. I don't really know if I got anything in common at all with any of these people. And you'll find more often than not that you will find common interests and common goals and you'll find common lifestyles. But at the same time, that's not what the most God-glorifying relationship looks like. Finally, the last goal of our God-glorifying relationships is evangelism. Listen, the goal is the transformation of our lives as our faith grows in Christ, right? As we minister to one another, listen, it's easy for you to come in here and sit on this pew and convince me that you're living a Christian life out there. It's easy. As far as I know, you guys go into your workplaces every day and y'all go about your daily routine and y'all are little Jesuses running around all over the place as far as I know. But you want to know what I bet the truth is? I bet half of you in here got a cussing problem. I ain't mad at you. Well, we ought to grow out of that, right? I bet half of you men in here have a pornography problem. I ain't mad at you. Well, we ought to have some help growing in that, right? I bet half of you women in here have a gossip problem. I ain't mad at you. But we ought to grow in that. We ought to work on that. We ought to be helping one another. So, again, the goal is the transformation of our lives. And the only way that happens is when our faith is nurtured by the relationships that are being developed so that we can be effective witness to the world. And listen, let me tell you something about small groups. You ought to be ready to invite people to your little group gatherings, because let me tell you something that you may not know. A person will come to your house before they'll come to your church. And they'll enjoy coming to your house before they'll come to your church. Matter of fact, I believe, I ain't going to point him out, but we got one sitting in this congregation today that is a salvation and a Christian today as a result of the fact that he was invited to a small group when he might not normally have came to church, but he came to that house and he was saved at that person's house. And now he is a part of the church because of that small group. I know these are some big changes that I'm talking, I do. But do you know why God puts pastors in front of churches? He don't put us up here so that we can rule and reign and we can tell you what you got to do and whip you and stand over you. No, instead, He puts us up here to provide direction and vision. He puts us up here to be able to look across the board and say, you know, here's what my congregation needs. So I'm asking you today, listen to what I'm teaching you from the Word. If you don't make a God-glorifying connection of some kind, you're just going to keep on going exactly the way you've gone in your faith. And let's just be honest. How many, you ain't got to raise your hand, but how many of you can say, man, I've been so stale in my faith for so long now that it ain't even funny? I just been right here. Or how many of you can say, I ain't even been right here. I've been going that way for too long now. Let me tell you something. If there were a God-glorifying relationship and a connection made in there, that ain't going to happen. Not without somebody calling you up and somebody stopping you and saying, hey, I've noticed that you're having some struggles. I've noticed that you've got some things going this direction. Relationships are hard. Relationships are difficult. But relationships are rewarding. And relationships are vital. I'm praying that you will ask God to help you to develop these relationships with people that you may not even have any common interest at all. And then last, I want you to remember this. Endeavor, try very hard to maintain the unity. You remember last week I told you to look at your neighbor and say, hello neighbor, one day I'm probably going to offend you. That's probably going to take place. But we have to be able to try hard to maintain the unity and try hard to bear with one another's flaws and failures and to be long-suffering in those so that we can help one another grow and be gentle in the process of it and be humble. And if we can do those things, you'll see this thing grow and you'll see yourself grow like you've never seen before. Y'all stand this morning. Whatever your need is, we have an altar call. If you just want to humble yourself before God, cry out to Him for whatever it is, this time is for you.